Welcome to Shedunnit. I'm Caroline Crampton. Golden Age detective fiction is having a bit of a moment. Over the last few years, there's been a resurgence of interest in crime fiction from the 1920s, 30s and 40s, with hard-to-obtain titles receiving new editions and new TV and film adaptations in the works. But it isn't just in the books from that period that we see this effect. Today's crime writers are turning more and more to the details and tropes of the classic whodunit. Whereas just a few short years ago, a publisher might have looked askance at a manuscript for a mystery laden with references to the Golden Age, today it's becoming positively desirable for authors to show off their knowledge of the genre's origins. It's in recognition of this fact that the Shedunnit Book Club has this month taken a break from reading books published in the first half of the 20th century, and is instead, in June, tackling a contemporary novel that grapples with the traditions of the Golden Age. The book club is the community that supports this podcast's continued existence. Paying members help the show remain independent and financially sustainable, so I can keep making new episodes for everyone. Each month, club members vote on which book they would like to read and discuss together. Other perks of joining include getting access to the 2 bonus episodes a month that I make just for members, ad-free episodes of the main podcast, and access to the community forum where all things mysteries are discussed. There's more information at shedunnitbookclub.com/join if you'd like to check it out. Anyway, this month, the club has chosen to read The Postscript Murders by Ellie Griffiths. This novel, published in the last year, is absolutely steeped in the traditions and tropes of the Golden Age of detective fiction, and so is perfect for considering how these ideas are being refashioned by today's writers. It follows 4 sleuths, 1 police detective and 3 amateurs, on their quest to discover who killed their friend Peggy, an elderly woman who loved reading murder mysteries. On the surface, it doesn't seem like anyone can have had a motive to kill a charming and inoffensive old lady, but the closer the quartet look, the more it seems like the solution to the case lies in Peggy's collection of classic crime novels. Ellie Griffiths is the pen name of Dominica de Rosa, a writer based in Brighton who is the author of 2 separate mystery series, the Dr. Ruth Galloway novels about a forensic archaeologist/sleuth in present-day Norfolk, and the Brighton Mysteries series, which are set in Dominica's hometown in the 1950s. The Postscript Murders reprise a detective character, D.S. Harbinder Kaur, from her standalone novel The Stranger Diaries, which won the 2020 Edgar Award for Best Novel. I'm delighted to welcome Dominica to Shedunnit to tell us more about how the Postscript Murders came together, and about her own love of Golden Age detective fiction. There are no major plot spoilers in this episode, by the way. And don't forget, if you'd like to join me to discuss the book at the end of the month, visit shedunnitbookclub.com/join once you finish listening to become a member of the book club. To start with, the premise of the book all revolves around this character Peggy, who is a murder consultant. And I'd be fascinated to know where that idea came to you from. Have you ever encountered someone with that kind of role?
Well, actually, there is a real-life model for Peggy, and it's my Aunt Marge. So I've got an Aunt Marge. Since I've started telling people the story, I realised so many people have an Aunt Marge. Harry Potter didn't he? So I have an Aunt Marge, and she used to live in Norfolk, where she was a great help with the Ruth books, actually, because she has a boat, and she was very helpful in researching those. But then she moved to the South Coast, quite near me. And something about, so like Peggy, she had a lovely flat which looked out over the sea and the promenade, just a little bit along the coast from me. I live in Brighton. Something about the new house, I don't know what it was, whether it was the setting, whether the fact she could look out of the sea, maybe it was the sea air, I don't know. But it just made her kind of obsessed with murder plots. And she kept thinking of new plots. She would look out of the window and look up and down the promenade. Do you see two people meeting and think, who are they? And then she'd ring me up, and she used to always ring me sort of, she still does quite often on a Sunday. And it's like, oh, hello, love. I've just seen a priest, and I was just thinking, could you kill someone with a thurible, and all that. So I started to think, well, what if there was somebody whose job was to think up crime plots for crime writers? Because Marge would always want me to put these plots in my book. And I'd sometimes say to her, Marge, why don't you write the book? And she'd say, no, love, I couldn't write the book, but I want you to put it in. And I did once use one of her murders in a Ruth book, actually, earlier on. So she's got a bit of form. And one of the reviewers, I think it was the Financial Times, said that it was the nastiest use of a stair lift they'd ever heard of. And Marge was so happy with that. She framed it. She was so happy with that review. So she wanted me to put them in my book. So I thought, what if there was an elderly lady, very respectable, my aunt's a retired maths teacher, very, very respectable. But what if her job was thinking up murders for crime writers? And then what would happen if she was murdered? I did have to, and it's not giving anything away because Peggy's murdered in the first page, I think. And I did have to square it with Marge, and she didn't mind the character getting killed off quite early. And she was fine about that, being a true mystery fan. So really, that's where the idea came from.
Well, that's amazing. Because is that something that, as someone who's written a lot of books now, that you struggle with that part of the process? That I need yet another way for someone to die before I can set this plot in motion?
I suppose so, in a way. As it might sound strange to a crime writer, the plot is always kind of the hardest bit for me, because I really like the characterization, and what was fun in this book was writing about 4 very different characters, all from their viewpoints. I really like that bit. I loved location and atmosphere, and that's where I always start as a writer, is with the place and with the atmosphere of the place. So sometimes the who killed who and why is a little bit the last thing to appear, and I guess my murders aren't very gory, so I don't have a kind of lot of blood and gore in my book. So it often is a sort of puzzle, who did what, when, and why. So I guess that's right. I am a little bit squeamish about killing people in horrible ways. And I think apart from the stair lift, I've never done anything too horrible. I think not, anyhow. So yeah, maybe that is the bit that I struggle with most.
It's helpful to have some external feedback, perhaps.
Yes, it is. It is, really is.
When you were putting together this book, because another thing that is remarkable and sort of makes it stand out is the fact that you've got a collective detective group, as opposed to, in your Ruth Galloway series, you've got an amateur and a professional, let's say, working in tandem, which is quite a classic mold. But in this case, you've got a little gang of 4, haven't you? Is that different? Does that feel differently when you're writing?
Yes, I mean, it was quite a challenge because, yes, so I've got the 4 characters. I've got the sort of Harbinder, who is Harbinder Kaur, who is the official detective. She's the detective sergeant who appears in Stranger Diaries as well. So she's kind of doing the police procedural bit. So I wanted to have 3 characters who weren't doing that. So there's Natalka, who's the Ukrainian carer of Peggy. There's Peggy's 80-year-old neighbour Edwin, and there's Benedict, who runs the coffee shop. So I wanted to have sort of very different characters. And the challenge, which I did quite enjoy actually, was of course they would all notice different things and they'd see different things. And Benedict's very much a crime fan, and he loves sort of TV crime and reading about crime and all sorts of things. So he sees a certain thing, whereas Edwin is maybe a slightly different generation, and he sees different things, but he's also a very good sleuth, and Natalka's quite dashing and takes risks. So I quite enjoyed doing all those things, but it was quite hard to remember who'd seen what and who'd remember what. And there are quite a lot of clues in this book that are kind of literary, like sort of anagrams and wordplay and things like that. And of course, who'd noticed that and who wouldn't, and things like that. So that was quite a challenge, but I did enjoy it. I have to say, I don't think I've ever enjoyed writing a book more.
Well, that definitely comes across. And something that I really, really liked about it, and why I think it's going to really, really appeal to fans of the podcast, is that it is so literary and so referential of the genre, and not just the genre today, although you do have the period at the Aberdeen Crime Festival where they're sort of contemporary writers, but it's very referential of crime fiction in the past as well. So is that something that you're a fan of as well?
Yes, and I'm so happy to have found your podcast. It's going to be one of my happy places because, yes, I love classic crime. I love golden age crime. And yes, one of the clues is about a golden age book, which is a made up writer, Sheila Atkins, and I had so much fun making up all her titles because I love thinking up titles for books. And I have to say, quite often my publishers sort of say, what a great title. No, we won't have that. because it's like too, I don't know, too silly, or it's a quote from Shakespeare or something. So I absolutely gave rein to all my, what I think of, a fantastic crimey titles. And my editor said afterwards, I hope you've got those all out of your system now. And I probably have. So there's a golden age writer at the centre of this. And I do really like this sort of genre of writing. I teach creative writing, and I do particularly like it. Also, I think it's a very sometimes quite overlooked how kind of dark some of these books are, and how sort of bleak they are. And one of my favourite golden age writers, I think she's almost out of print now, is Nancy Spain, and I love her books. I mean, who wouldn't love a writer who has a book, talking of titles, called Cinderella Goes to the Morgue? I mean, that's such a good title. But there's a book of hers called R in the Month, which is set at sort of run down sort of seaside town in winter, and it's so atmospheric and brilliant. So yes, that's definitely an era that I like, and I did very much enjoy sort of making up a few golden age plots. And I suppose in The Stranger Diaries I'd made up a Victorian short stories. I love the Victorian era, so I'm a huge fan of Wilkie Collins. I see quite a lot of your listeners are also Wilkie Collins fans. So yes, so I really did enjoy that.
And what do you think, someone who's writing crime fiction today, what do you like to take from that golden age period, and what is sort of fresh and new, do you think? Are there things that you enjoy imitating?
Yes, well, I do think Golden Age can teach us quite a lot about the power of understatement and what's not said. And there are some, it's very spare. I was rereading an Agatha Christie the other day, and there's just pages and pages of dialogue. And you don't even know who's saying what, though you can guess Poirot, because he keeps saying, "Oh, mon ami," so that's why she keeps doing that. So you can tell it's him, but there's just lots of dialogue, and it's very understated, but all the clues are there. And of course, it's very difficult in a short novel like Agatha Christie. I mean, they're sort of, I don't know, about 60,000 words, and on average, I think a book now is about 90,000 words. So with so little padding to do such a good plot, it's very, very hard, and to not cheat at all, and to really keep you guessing to the last minute. I write a series of crime novels for children, actually, for middle grade, it's called. So it's like 9+, and she's called a girl called Justice. And there are 3 books in the series now. And it made me think about that, writing those books, because of course when you're writing books for children, maybe it's a little bit like a golden age novel, in that clearly there's not going to be any gratuitous violence, there's not going to be any sex, there's not going to be much description of the countryside, so it's all plot. And that's actually very hard to do, something that's kind of all plot. Having said there's no sort of description, I do think that a lot of those writers are very good at, that wonderful Neo Marsh book, Opening Night, that's set at the theatre, and they're very, very good at atmosphere, I think. But again, without too many words, without using too many words.
We'll hear more from Dominica, including how she keeps up with her 2 books a year schedule, after the break. This episode of Shedunnit is sponsored by Dear Holmes, a mail-based Victorian mystery game. In the US, Father's Day is coming up very soon, on the 20th of June, and this could be the perfect present for your mystery-loving parent. Every week, you or your chosen gift recipient will receive a real letter in the post that contains clues to help you solve a monthly mystery set in the Victorian period. At the end of the month, Sherlock Holmes himself will write to you and reveal his own solution to the puzzle. So your challenge as a detective is to beat him to it. How you choose to investigate is entirely up to you. You can make it a group effort, like the sleuths in the Postscript Murders, perhaps involving your friends and family in thrashing out the details of the case. Or you can go solo and unravel the case all by yourself. What could be more perfect for the Shedunnit listener in search of a whodunit-based distraction? To give this as a gift, or to join for yourself, visit dearholmes.com, that's Holmes as in Sherlock Holmes, HOLMES, and enter promo code Shedunnit to get $5 off your first order. That's dearholmes.com and code Shedunnit for $5 off. This episode is also sponsored by 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All, an eerie historical mystery by 2-time National Book Award finalist Laura Ruby. Based on a true story, it begins in Chicago in 1941, when protagonist Frankie's mother has died and her father has left her in an orphanage. Temporarily, he says. Years later, Frankie delves into her own past, wanting answers about what really happened. With the Second World War in the background, she starts unearthing secrets that should maybe have stayed buried. In case you need any more convincing on this highly readable, creepy story, this book has had some absolutely great press. The New York Times called it, quote, haunting and hopeful in equal measure, and Booklist said that it was stunning. Right now, the audiobook of 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All by Laura Ruby is available at a special deeply discounted price at your favourite audiobook retailer. So it's the perfect time to grab a copy and settle in for some seriously spooky listening. That's 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All by Laura Ruby. And now, back to the Postscript Murders. Because place and atmosphere, as you said, is something that's very important to your books, and you've got two very distinct landscapes in your different series. And in this one, all of the stuff about, Peggy and Edwin in their block of flats looking out to sea and reflecting on old age and all that sort of thing, it's very evocative. And where did that come from? Is that also from your aunt?
I suppose so. I think it's a move, isn't it, that maybe one takes at a certain point in life to maybe move from a flat into an apartment. And Edwin is quite sort of scathing about the apartments. They're called Seaview House, and he calls them in his head Preview House. So it's like a preview of death sort of thing. So he's quite gloomy about it, particularly. But I get the impression that sort of Peggy saw it in a different way. She saw it as a new opportunity. And so I think it is a part of your life when you are thinking of, you're thinking of the next stage. This stage, it might be your last home, I guess. So I think you would look at it, and I suppose I did look at it a bit like that, when Marge moved in. But also, she loved it. She really loves the view, and she loves seeing the sea, and she loves that sort of. And a seaside town is actually a very good place for a crime novel because it does a lot of the things that you need. Like you really need a sort of range of people, and there's usually a range of people in a seaside town. People sort of wash up next to the sea and sort of stay there. So you often have very grand houses. In this book, there's a Millionaire's Row, which there is in Brighton, where there are these massively grand houses. But also you have quite grotty accommodation. You have a big range. But also if you set something near the sea, there's always a way of escaping, And actually Shoreham, this is based in Shoreham by sea. There's even an airport, which lovely little airport, little 1920s airport. So people can, and they do in this book, even get a plane. So I think the ideal setting for a crime novel is somewhere like that. Somewhere quite evocative, somewhere there's a range, a social range, and also people with different backgrounds and histories, and also a way of escaping.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I suppose you've got two detective characters now on two different coasts of the UK.
I do, yes. I do wonder about that. It obviously is something, and also my Brighton series set in the 1950s. I do seem to, a friend of mine, William Shaw, is a really good crime writer, writes the Alex Cupidity series. He, when he was a journalist, did an article about people who live near the sea, and there were some studies done, I would have to ask him about, that showed that people got more eccentric the nearer they got to the sea. And you could almost see that. See, you get out of the station at Brighton Station, and around Brighton Station are sort of accountants' offices and things like that. And as you get near the sea, you get the tattoo parlours, you get the slightly stranger shops. And nearer and nearer to the sea, the slightly odder and stranger things are. So I think that might be why I'm drawn to the sea.
And you're absolutely right about the sort of social mix at a seaside town, because people move there for all sorts of different reasons, don't they?
Yes.
And one thing that I am sort of in my head thinking about as a trend, but I don't know if it is one yet, but I feel like there's more and more crime novels these days that feature older characters, of which the Postscript Murders is one. And it's such a fascinating thing to do, and you don't see it perhaps quite so much in Golden Age stuff, with the exceptions of Miss Marple and so on. People tend to be sort of middle-aged and active when they're involved in a crime novel, but there's a whole hidden history to a life that you can reveal, as you do in this book. I wondered if you had any reflections on that.
Yeah, that's so true. As a matter of fact, I did think when I wrote this book, gosh, this will be really unusual, a group of old people solving a crime, and older people solving a crime. And of course, it came out at exactly the same time as Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club, which I really, really enjoyed, which of course is about a group of old people in an old people's sort of complex solving crime. So very, very similar plot, though actually I think they are quite dissimilar books. But it is something that happens all the time, isn't it? You think this is a great idea, and somebody else has it. But you're so right about the golden age. I recently reread Agatha Christie's By the Pricking of My Thumbs, which is it's a Tommy and Tuppence novel, which they're often a bit sort of ignored, aren't they? But it's very good, again, very good on atmosphere, very creepy. But it starts off in an old people's home, and they keep saying things like, well, poor old soul, needed to put her in an old people's home. She was 60. And you think, oh my goodness, to us that is young now. Maybe it's because I'm in my 50s, I'm thinking that, but and then there's another, oh well, she's 70, so and nowadays 70-year-olds are Joanna Lumley, aren't they, and glamorous people going around the world, and it really does make you think, as you say, apart from Miss Marple, who was kind of ancient throughout. It has been actually, having said that, By the Pricking of My Thumbs is Tommy and Tuppence in their later years. I guess they're in their 50s. And they do muse quite a lot on that, and the fact that, they'd had that exciting wartime past, and what do they do now? And what does Tuppence do now as a woman? So actually there is a little bit of that in the books if you look hard enough for it. But yes, I think like a lot of people, as I get older, my idea of what is old gets older and older. So Peggy is 90, and she's quite a spring chicken.
Another nice improvement you've made on the form with this book is by making Peggy's carer a really fully realised character. I mean, there's several carer characters in the book, and I think there is perhaps a tendency to make those people invisible in fiction and in TV and so on, and you sort of done the opposite.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you like Natalka. My mum was looked after by carers in her last years, and they were just such wonderful people. And again, it's an interesting job because people come to it from such different places and life experiences, and they're doing it for all sorts of different reasons, yet they are drawn to something that is hard work and very hard work, but it's also caring. So that they are particularly interesting people, I do think. But you're quite right about, in a way, the golden age. I always think of Miss Marple often says about some poor dead maid, oh, poor silly girl. And that's all she gets. That's all the epitaph she gets, So, yes, you want to bring out the figures, the hidden figures who might be overlooked in that genre of fiction, definitely. Yes, there's a terrible, I like Josephine Tay. I'm a fan of, Daughter of Time, huge influence on me. But there's an awful line in Brat Farrar where she says, the sort of sympathetic character says, oh, can your latest idiot take a telephone message? You think, goodness sake. So yes, there's the snobbery there that is in some of the books, I have to say, which I hope modern crime fiction doesn't have that, I hope.
Yes, I think definitely I've been looking into this a lot recently, the way servants are just part of literally furniture is definitely not how people write today, and that's a definite upgrade. Your characters, so I suppose in a way that this is, as you say, a sequel to The Stranger Diaries, because Harbinder carries over. Are we going to meet any of the characters again in the future? Do you know?
I had thought it would be a standalone, though I do think Harbinder will appear again. So she, as you said, she appeared in The Stranger Diaries and she appears again here. So I feel she's got one more adventure in her at least, and a few things I'd like her to do. I think it would be interesting to follow her doing, let's say. I had thought that I wouldn't write about them again, but I've never missed characters as much as I miss Edwin and Benedict and Natalka. So I don't know. I'm obviously quite bad at standalones because I keep bringing my characters back. So I wouldn't say never, that they'd never appear. But my idea is that the next Harbinder book will be a whole new cast of characters, and the only one we'll know will be Harbinder's. That's the idea. But you never know. I can see them teaming up to solve more crimes. And I'm also quite sort of taken with maybe a short story about Peggy before, because as we've said, she is sort of central to the novel, but she does die quite early on. So maybe a short story about her would be fun.
Yes, to visit her pre the events of the Postscript Murders. Yeah. Well, you're in charge, so.
I suppose I am. Yes.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about your sort of writing habits and your writing process, because you're a very regular, and as a fan, I can always rely on a new Ruth book and so on. How do you manage all of your different characters and your different series?
Well, I usually, thank you. I mean, last couple of years I have published 2 books a year, and that didn't stop in lockdown. In fact, I felt very lucky to have that to escape to be honest with you. And I try and write every day. I'm very lucky. My children are grown up, and I do a bit of teaching, but that's it really. So, and I've got a little writing shed in my garden, which is where I'm talking to you from. Yeah, so I try and write every day. I'm very lucky. Usually I can do some. Usually just me here with the cat writing away. I do usually just write one book at a time. So I wouldn't say write a Ruth book in the morning and a Brighton mystery in the afternoon. So I have to be sort of in that place, I guess, when I write it. The only exception is my children's series, A Girl Called Justice, because I sometimes write a chapter of that on Friday to cheer myself up, because I just really, really enjoy writing those books. So that's like a little treat I give myself sometimes on a Friday. But usually, so I obviously had notebooks I've written, when Ruth was born, when Nelson was born, when the events of the books happened. Because, of course, now I'm writing Ruth 14, actually, at the moment. It's called The Locked Room. And they're 14 years of stuff, to remember. And I usually am quite good at it. But sometimes I can be. Or sometimes you think, did I say that? In this book that I'm writing at the moment, she goes to a school reunion, and I knew I'd talked about her school friends somewhere. And it took me quite a long time to find it, but I had. So I was able to sort of, and luckily I put quite a sort of teasing little thing in about one of them. So I was quite pleased with myself then. So I was able to put that in.
So yes, thanks to your past self.
Yes, thank you, past self. Expand
on that. Yes. So how long would you say it takes you to write one of your novels?
It's sort of like everything, isn't it, really? So as I say, I've been contracted to write 2 a year. So it basically takes 6 months. So I usually start one in January and sort of finish in July, and start the next one in August and finish in January. So it sort of works itself up like that. I'm often editing one while I'm writing another, but that's okay. It's just the kind of creative getting the story down that I feel I can't do 2 at once. So that's more or less what it takes me. Yeah, and but again, like everything, when I wrote 1 a year, it took me a year. And if I gave myself, at some point, I will take myself off this treadmill, and then it will probably take me 5 years. Who knows? But at the moment, it doesn't seem too treadmillish, actually.
I was doing some research recently about what Agatha Christie did during the Second World War, and she wrote 2 books a year throughout the war, and in one case she wrote 3. And she says in her autobiography that she found she had so much more time once, her husband was away with the armed forces and there was no social life. She was actually living in London, but there was no social life because everyone had left. So she had nothing to do apart from write. And that made me think that that's a little bit like the last year, perhaps.
It is, isn't that interesting? Yeah, and did those novels feature the war? I'm trying to think.
I think a couple of the later ones did. I think the sort of ones that come out in 44, 45 sort of reference it, but largely not. And actually the year that she wrote 3, one of them was Curtain, which then wasn't published until the 70s, but she wrote it in 41, they think, and then had it put away as the last Poirot.
Yes, yeah, that's such a good book. Gosh, that's very interesting. Yes, you forget really, Third Girl is the 60s, isn't it? She did sort of keep writing right up to that point. I do think there are similarities. So funny enough, the Ruth book I'm writing at the moment, which is Ruth 14, it's called The Locked Room. It is set in 2020 because I couldn't really get away from that because I've been writing one every year. So she is locked down with Nelson, without Nelson, in this book. And at the same time, I'm thinking of the next Justice book, which will be in the Second World War. Be 1939, because that's where I've got to in that series. And there are sort of similarities. I think of Justice going to school with her gas mask and school suddenly seeming sort of different and having different rules. And I am seeing similarities there, definitely. Yes. It's very interesting. Like Agatha Christie, I think writers are very lucky because we can escape, can't we? You can escape what's happening into your own world, really.
And process it into whatever is helpful. Yes. No, I was very struck by what she said about how I just had nothing to do apart from work.
Yes.
Which I think is probably what many of us have found. Well, I think that's everything that I wanted to ask you.
Oh, it's been lovely to talk to you. And just to say, I'm so flattered that people wanted to hear about Postscript Murders, and there probably will be another Harbinder book at some point, but the next book from me will be the next Ruth book, which will be in February, and it's called The Locked Room.
Wonderful. very much to Dominica, aka Ellie Griffiths, for joining me. The Postscript Murders is available now at all good booksellers, and if you'd like to discuss it with other members of the Shedunnit Book Club community at the end of June, sign up now at shedunnitbookclub.com/join. This episode of Shedunnit was hosted by me, Caroline Crampton, and edited by Ewan McAleese. Member support for the Shedunnit Book Club is provided by Connor McLaughlin, and the podcast's advertising partner is Multitude. You can get more information about this episode and links to all the books mentioned at shedunnitshow.com/goldenageinspiration. I provide transcripts for every episode of the podcast too. Find them at shedunnitshow.com/transcripts. Thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode.